Hello, Gasaholics. I'm Hot Rod Bob, and you've got Gas, the Great American Auto Scene. Since 1990, your source for automotive information and some humor from time to time. Now, today we're going to talk about a compact car from General Motors. Earlier, a few episodes ago, we talked about the Nova, or the Chevy 2, which was one of two compact cars that Chevrolet got. The Corvair was first, followed by the Chevy 2. Now, no one or no other division of General Motors got an equivalent to the Corvair. They didn't get an equivalent to the Nova until much later on. They got their own compacts that were rather unique, and Pontiac's was the most unique of the other three, or the other two that were left over. Now, Buick got the Skylark, Olds got the Cutlass, and Pontiac got the Tempest. But the upscale version of the Tempest was called the Le Mans. Now, for some reason, General Motors introduced the Pontiac Tempest Le Mans line in 1960 in Paris. Why Paris? Well, possibly because of the name Le Mans. Now, not very well recognized here in the U.S., but very well recognized in Europe. Well, the Le Mans was an upscale version of this Tempest, and the Tempest was unique in many ways. First off, it had a transaxle, much like the Corvair did, and used the back half of the chassis from the Corvair. But the front half was the same as the Olds Cutlass and the Buick Skylark, with some differences. Now, Pontiac, being a more heavy-duty division and a more performance-oriented division, had 5-lug 15-inch wheels, whereas the Olds and the Buick had 4-lug 13-inch wheels. They didn't have a bigger wheel option. They really didn't have performance options, although the Buick did get, and so did the Olds, a 215 cubic inch V8. Buick's was the nailhead design. Oldsmobiles looked more conventional with slanted valve covers. And Pontiac also got the 215 aluminum V8. But not many people remember that because, well, there's only a few thousand of those sold. Most people went for the 4-cylinder. Now, the 4-cylinder the Pontiac Tempest had was very unique. It was half a 389 V8. Yeah, they just sliced it off, and you had the right half of a 389. Now, it had 3 configurations: a single barrel with 8.25 to 1 compression ratio, a 2-barrel with a 10.251 to compression ratio, and a 4-barrel version with the same 10.25 compression ratio. Now, this 4-cylinder engine was pretty stout. As a matter of fact, Mickey Thompson set a number of speed records at Bonneville using that 4-cylinder engine in a streamliner. But the Pontiac was even more different. Using the Corvair transaxle in the back and the engine up front, it had to have some form of a drive shaft. Well, they did, but not a conventional drive shaft as we're used to today. It was actually, they called it almost like a rope, and it was on an angle, very small, if any, transmission or drive shaft hump on the floor of the Pontiac Tempest. So the Pontiac Tempest was unique in that respect. Now, all divisions got the 215 V8 back in the early days of these cars, but Pontiac didn't stay with that. And in 1963, the last year of the Pontiac Tempest, the small rear transaxle model, they got the 326. Now, it really wasn't 326, but for some reason, John Z. DeLorean, who was the head of the Pontiac engineering and so forth at that time, it was actually a 336 cubic inch V8 engine. Now, GM had an edict that no other division could have anything bigger than Chevrolet's 327. So, for some reason, the upper management didn't know what the middle management knew, and it was not a 326 as they marketed it. It was a 336. Quite a potential for horsepower, and it was a neat vehicle. Now, when the Tempest first came out, it had a 3-speed column shift, non-synchro first, and a 2-speed automatic transmission, somewhat like a Power Glide, but again, it's kind of different. Later on, they had another transmission that was actually 2 Corvair innards together. Now, how they did that and why they did, I'm not quite sure, but it was a 4-speed with clutchless operation. Okay. Now, they did have a regular 4-speed later on the V8 cars, but there were very few of those made in 1963. 64 was the real year for the Tempest as they increased in size. Now, the Tempest had like I said, the four cylinders. They were 195 cubic inches, 3.2 liters, and they called them the Trophy 4s. Now, these engines, like I said, derived from the 389 in the three different configurations. They also got the 215 cubic inch V8, as I said, but only in the first 2 to 3 years of production, and it was a different engine, although it was 215 cubic inches, and it shared some parts with the Buick. It was different. Hi, Chris McGee. How are you doing? And Merrick, thanks for tuning in. What happened? We lost you for a while. Technical difficulties here with the internet, and I had to start all over again. All right, when the Tempest first came out, it had the ability, well, not the ability, but it was a 50-50 weight distribution, just about. That four-cylinder in the front, the transaxle in the rear, made that car a very good handling car. And this car was so good at the time, again, at the time, that it was awarded many, well, recognition things from the magazines. It was considered a top vehicle by Popular Mechanics and a number of other magazines, and was Car of the Year. The wide-body cars in the Tempest line, well, Tempest had big drum brakes. The others didn't have this big a drum. They had the 5-bolt circle, like I told you about, but the others didn't. They had a 4-bolt mount for the wheels. Again, the engines I talked about, the V8, the 215 that was derived from the Buick, there were only 3,600 of those made, and that again was 1961 and 1962 only. The aluminum V8 was in that car. A lot of people don't know that, and frankly, I didn't either. I always thought the 326, or the real 336, was what they put in them. Well, the 215 got to about 1% of production, and it had 155 to 215 horsepower, but really no barn burner at the time. The engine blocks used for the 215 installed in Tempest were distinct. They used other models because the Buick factory markings were there, but the Pontiac division stamped their own identification on the engine. Now, all Pontiac 215 blocks began with 161P on the block. So if you get what you think is a Buick V8, but it's got that 161P stamped into the block, well, then it's the Pontiac version. And it may not be a direct, well, move for you if you're trying to put it in a Buick. Now, the 1962s were stamped 162. And this was also indicated on the transmission of the car, whether it was an automatic or a manual. In 1961, transmission choices were a 3-speed column shift, it was a manual transmission, or with a non-synchronized first gear, or a 2-speed automatic. Really not performance-oriented in either case. And the lever for the automatic was much like the Corvairs, and it was on the dashboard. For 62, a floor-mounted, full synchronized 4-speed manual transmission became available. So now they're starting to get some performance ideas in there. I'm sure John Z. DeLorean had something to do with it because we saw his handiwork on the GTO beginning in 1964. For 1962, the Tempest models were a sedan, a coupe, a station wagon, and even a convertible. Customers wanted something fancier, could step up to the Le Mans package, as I said, and this had bucket seats and some different trim pieces, and that's really about it. There was no Le Mans sedans or station wagons, only the coupe and possibly a convertible. And although Oldsmobile and Buick offered pillarless hardtops on the Cutlass and Skylark representatives, Pontiac didn't offer the pillarless hardtop on the Le Mans model. It was a sedan. Now, in 1963, Le Mans became a separate series, and its sales were nearly 50% of all Tempest and Le Mans production for that year. In 1963, referred to as the senior compacts, they were slightly larger and heavier than the 61 and 62s, but I liked the 63 Tempest body styling. It was really nice. It looked good. It was more formal. It just looked better. It also didn't appear to share body parts with its Buick and Oldsmobile counterparts. A new version of the automatic transmission that I talked about earlier came in. They called it Tempest or Tempest Torque on the case. Now, it was redesigned to handle the new V8's additional torque. This 4-speed manual transmission had not been redesigned, or the regular 4-speed had not been redesigned, but very few V8-equipped Tempest were built with that transmission. The 3-speed manual transmission remained available for all engine options. Now, the 326 had 260 horsepower and 352 foot-pounds of torque, which was great for this little car. The actual displacement, like I said, 336 cubic inches, and I told you why, because, well, you couldn't beat Chevrolet's 327. The cast-iron V8 increased the Tempest's weight to 260 pounds above what the four-cylinder was, but it also changed the balance, and it made it more 54% of the weight to the front, 46% to the rear, which still was good. But the Tempest was strong enough that Car Life magazine wrote, "No one will wonder why they didn't use the 389. Fuel economy, not really high on the priority list back then, and the 326, even in that lightweight body, could only muster 19 miles per gallon on the highway. The V8 option proved popular, as 52% of the 131,000 Tempest and Le Mans models sold in '63 were ordered with that V8. Now, there was perhaps the most famous of the Tempest was the 12 1963 Super Duty cars. Now, these were built to meet NHRA factory experimental class regulations, and they turned low 12s at the time in 1963, which was quite impressive. And Mickey Thompson was actually driving one of those. Shrewsbury still owns his car, or I'm told, and it is still equipped with Pontiac's Power Shift transaxle. And that was that transaxle I was talking to you about that had actually 2 Power Glide innards installed in it. It was a clutchless shifting transmission, and it was used primarily for the drag racing. In October 2008, one of the most rare factory cars that had been missing for decades, it was a Super Duty Tempest Coupe, was auctioned off. The seller who had the car obviously didn't know what he had at first and started the auction off at $500. That didn't last long. The car actually sold for $226,000 according to published reports, because the people bidding knew what it was. The guy who owned it really didn't. So the first generation of the Pontiac Tempest came out when all the other compacts for the divisions came out. The Olds, the Pontiac, and the Buick had relatively the same rough appearance. Pontiac had different front ends. The doors were interchangeable with the Olds, and the back ends were very similar. The size was the same. Pontiac's was unique in its powertrain and its braking and other items in the car. The Olds and the Buick pretty much were the same. Again, just different trim. Pontiac stood out, and it stood out a lot. Pontiac Tempest, another compact from General Motors that went away when GM upscaled everything to midsize. Buick, Olds, and Pontiac lost their compact cars. Chevrolet gained a midsize car and kept both of their compact cars, making Chevrolet the sales leader of the General Motors portfolio. I'm Hot Rod Bob, and you've got gas. We're talking about the Pontiac Tempest here, the first generation of that Tempest. You have a great day, and please like and subscribe wherever you're seeing or listening to GAAS, the Great American Auto Scene. Brought to you by our friends at Service Tech Equipment, Valley Head Service, and Irwindale Drag Strip and Speedway. I'm Hot Rod Bob, and you've got gas. Thanks for being a gasaholic.